for about 45 minutes to an hour. Ty's going to talk a little bit about monitor setup and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Ty Clausen. I'm the Territory Customer Support Manager for John Deere. I take care of Frontier and then also Tractor Central here to the east. Kind of a little bit of a history. Born and raised dairy farm. Worked for my local dealership, John Deere dealership in Northfield, Minnesota is where I grew up. From there I went to parts of the PDC in Milan with my first job with John Deere. Went through instructing, training department, and then I was in Des Moines for about 2 years roughly there with a product support for the sprayer group. So from there I've been on territory just about a year now actually. So
you were with the sprayer factory for 2 years?
Yep.
Okay, traveled all over the country?
Yep, traveled all over the country, traveled Canada, did go down to Brazil for a week, about a week and a half, and then I was also in Australia for a couple weeks visiting sprayers and customers down there. So been kind of all over, taught on sprayers for about 2.5 years before moving over there to Des Moines to be product support for the sprayer group. So you guys asked the questions, I'm about 99.9% sure I should be able to answer them off the top of my head. If there isn't anything, I'll definitely find you the answer pretty quick. I still have a fair amount of contacts down there, so I do talk to those guys pretty regularly yet. Well, welcome guys. Like Mark said, thank you for your business with Frontier as well as with John Deere. Kind of go through a little bit of the SprayStar setup. As a show of hands, what do we have for models with you, a few of you guys here? What do we have? 30. What size boom? 90. 90, okay. 20, 15-inch basin, custom, 20?
4720.
4720, okay. All right. Together, I'm assuming. Okay, just rather ask that. Okay. So for the SprayStar, since most of you guys probably haven't looked and seen this here, probably for about a year-ish now, kind of give you a little refresher course, kind of go through this. We'll go through a display, like Mark was saying, about an hour down here, and then we'll jump up to the shop there. We'll spend about another hour or so kind of doing some walk-around stuff, just kind of getting you familiar with the machine again, some key areas, key points that we need to make sure we're looking at before we get into the season, and just kind of maintenance type deals. So starting off here, this is my main SprayStar page. So when I actually go into my display, I fire up my machine, I click the main, where'd my arrow go here? Click the main menu. I got my sprayer lined up here. So click on it. The simulator's not working with me here this morning. This is a page I'll get. So this is kind of my main SprayStar page. This is what I'll be viewing. So kind of going through here, I got my performance monitor up top that I can change and select different things. Usually most things that are always up there is your miles per hour. What are you actually driving, your speed. Some distances, gallon per minute flow through your flow meter. That's always good to kind of watch and monitor because you can see a lot of different things happening with your sprayer when it comes to the gallons per minute flow of what you're actually trying to achieve for your gallons per acre, what your pressure is doing, what is your machine physically doing for you. As we move down here, we have my different rates. I have rates 1, 2, and 3. The one that's highlighted in yellow is going to be the one that you've selected. And how to select that? We do have the rate knob on the right-hand side console where you can switch between 1, 2, and 3. We also have manual for manual pressure, and then we have aux, which is for prescriptions. Okay.
This stuff is all the same, no matter if it's at 10, 20, 30.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yep, no matter what the model it is, it all stays the same. There is some few little changes as we kind of go through there. If you're going back to the aughts and the 10s, we're still talking brown box. 20, we're still dual displays, brown box and 2600 display. So there is a few little changes there, but as we get into the 30 series and then into the new 4 series, it does stay pretty common all the way through. So I'll try to point out some areas that do change as we go, but in all, brown box, definitely a different view, different look, different feel, but in the same general theory, it doesn't change. So the sprayers have kind of stayed the same throughout. The lifetime never really changed how we're looking at things. So we have different rates, 1, 2, and 3, aux, prescription, manual. We can target a manual pressure, so if we go back 20, 30 years, pressure and speed, we got our rate. So that's really what we're looking at. Nothing really changed in there. As we go down, so we got our target rates, targeting 12 gallons the acre. Here's what here's what the sprayer is physically doing. So this should be matching what you're actually trying to target, okay? If you don't, you are gonna get alarms. We do have our tank, so depending on the size of the machine, you can have 800 gallon, 1,000 gallon, or 1,200 gallon tanks on there. So if you're looking at the machines, 4720, 800 gallon, 4730, 800 gallon, 4830, 1,000 gallons, and then 4930, 4940, you're looking at 1,200 gallons. As we go into the new 4 Series sprayers, the R4030 is 800 gallons, the R4038 is 1,000 gallons, and the R4045 is 1,200 gallons, and the new 4630 replacement is the R4023, which is 600 gallons. Okay. And just an explanation on the 4 Series and how that model works. So like an R4030, the 30 is represented as liters, which transfers into gallons. So we're kind of going the metric system here. So R4030, 3,000 liters, R4038, 3,800 liters, R4045, 4,500 liters, 1,200 gallons. So kind of a little history behind there. So if it's all blue, that's, you got a full tank, you do have to manually reset that. It's just a way to monitor the system, figure out what you got left rough. As we get into the 4 Series sprayer, we can do target fill on some of those when we can pull in product, and we actually can say, I want X amount of gallons put on the machine. It'll shut off everything, and that's how much you got on the machine. So kind of working on some improvements and updates to the machines as we go. Pressure, what is my pressure transducer actually doing for my machine? So targeting 40 PSI, or my spray off pressure is 40 PSI. I'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. Down below here we have my different sections. If they're all white, that means they've been disabled, or the switch has been turned off on the machine. If they're black, that means they're enabled, they're ready to spray. So once I turn my solution pump on, hit my master spray switch, blue arrows will show up at the bottom of each section, knowing that the machine is actually on and spraying. To verify it, you can turn around and look and make sure you're seeing the water come out of the nozzle. So down here I have boom track, so I'll go through the setup there. How many of you guys got boom track on the machines? You do, you guys, or no, or okay? We'll go through the setups there, what kind of best fits your environment, your needs. What are you looking for? One thing I always like to point out, boom track is not a collision detection system. Some guys down in the southwest in the prairies, they usually kind of just go and spray, and I've heard of a lot of booms getting wrapped around oil rigs and things like that. So, well, it should have moved. Well, it's not a collision detection system. So here I have my different setups here, my different options. We'll go through each one of these tabs or buttons. We'll go through them individually here. I do have a few extra things here. I do have my rate selection, my master spray, and my boom track activation here, or on off. I do have these. This is a simulator. Those will not be on your display truly when you go fire up your machine. Down here I do have some other things that will be parked there. I got my foam markers, my left and my right. Park brake, what field range am I in? Since we're talking 47, 4700 series or 30 series, 20 series, we are going to have the 4 speed ranges as we get into 4930, 4940, or 4920. Also, we do have multiple speed ranges since we have variable displacement motors. I'll go through a lot more of that when we get up to the machine through a simple walk around. So, fuel, solution pump, whether it's on or off. If it's grayed out, it's showing that it is off. If it's solid black lines, then it's actually on and running. And then the foam marker there as well. So, any questions right now? Yes, Daryl.
When you look at your rate 1 and 3, do you advise that you set those rates within the limitations of the tips?
Yes. Well, so this can kind of be customer preference. I got a lot of visits I've done, like a co-op, for example. They'll plug in 3 different rates because they're constantly changing it. If they need a change within the field, they'll actually just click on it. Once I can touch the screen, I can actually physically change that target rate to whatever I want. So say rate 2, I want to change it from 12 gallons the acre and I want to go to 13. Hit accept. Now it's at 13 gallons the acre. Now it shows up there. But to physically change it from rate 2 to say rate 3, I do have to go to my dial indicator on the side console and actually change that selection to 15 gallon acre. Okay. Good question. If I'm doing a manual pressure, I'll actually have to, I gotta cycle through this here. Manual pressure, I'm targeting 30, say I want to change that to 55 PSI. Now I'll target 55 PSI. As long as I know my speed, I should achieve my rate correctly, okay? So just kind of going back to the original way we always spray, pressure and speed gives you a rate. Anything else? Yes?
That E switch, does that mean the boom is automatically height adjusted?
The E.
It says
Oh, this one? Yeah, so this,
the boom auto level?
yep, this is the boom track, so this is where we'll go in for our settings of the boom track. I'll go through it. You can also click here to get into those settings as well, where the boom track button is.
How does that work? Is that ultrasound?
Yep, it's just pretty much like a sonar sensor out on the boom. You can do up a 3 or 5 sensor system on a 20 or 30 series. And then as we get in a new 4 series sprayer, it is a standard 5 sensor system. You cannot get the 3 sensor systems anymore. No, good question. And how the sensor kind of works is you're looking at about roughly at 3 feet of height on your boom, you're looking roughly about 3 feet in front of you on the ground. So kind of give you that kind of visual aspect of what you're actually looking at.
Is that standard on everything now?
No, it's an option code that you would order, so you could order a sprayer without it if you want. Otherwise, you can order it with it. Or say you bought it without it and you want to put it on later, you can plug it in. It's a plug and play.
So once you use that, you never want to go back.
Yep, yeah, pretty much. I got a lot of guys. I know when we originally came out with Boom Track, it was not so back and prior to August of 09, it was very sketchy at best. But when we implemented some new software in 09, it did make some drastic improvements and got a lot better.
Does that raise the whole boom up and down then?
So it depends on how you set it up. So we'll just go through the setup of it here, since we're on the topic. So this is my setup here, and Dave, I'll kind of get into this, so pay attention. So first off here, I have my target mode. I have ground or canopy I can select. Ground is typically your better one to use. Canopy is another option. So what that's doing is canopy, it kind of ciphers through a little bit of the material there and it looks for more of a solid surface. Ground, it's really kind of going after kind of the first thing it really sees. So depending on what you're spraying, so if you're spraying, your post-emerge spraying, you're probably going to want to go more towards the target of ground. You're going to see a little bit better reaction. If you're looking in like a cover crop, say wheat, oats, barley, whatever, canola, you're going to want to be more in a canopy style mode. So, but once again, you can choose which whenever you feel is best reaction to what you're actually spraying, okay? Response rate, this does change as we go into the new 4 series sprayer. We do have the different options, low, medium, high. Typically on all the units that I've been out and I've had conversations with customers, many customers, and what their best preference is. A lot of guys are kind of in that medium range. I do have a few that go into medium high, but what this is doing is just what do you want for your reaction? How fast do you want the boom to react to seeing those objects from the sensor? Some guys will run them on low. I do see a few guys that do it there. The one thing I do caution is you go higher in the system, the boom likes to react to itself. So the guys that are running in the medium high or medium high range, or as we get into the newer sprayers, it's 1, 2, 3, and 4 or 5. The higher you go, the more the boom wants to kind of react to itself. So don't get, depending on what you're at, rolling hills, things like that, you kind of want to be a little bit on the lighter side. If you're on the higher side of things, then it actually wants to start to overcompensate itself and kind of start dancing. You want it to start dancing. You want to be able to keep it level and reacting to what it's actually seeing, not moving the left wing up and the other one's actually level and it wants to kind of start dancing itself. So use to what your preference is. Kind of play with it, adjust it, how you feel fit. It's truly dependent on your speed too. I mean, if you're around that 10 mile an hour range, hey, you can be a little bit less reactive and it's going to work pretty good. If you're in the higher speed range, up in the higher end there, medium, high, you're gonna do pretty well. But as you start getting into the 20-mile-an-hour spraying, which I don't know how many guys actually do that around here, field size is usually kind of our limitations. Medium high, you could start seeing some goofy things start happening there a little bit, okay? Here's my target heights, or wait, oops, missed one here. Here's where I can target whether I want individual, so the left wing, center, or right wing. So Dave, this kind of gets into your question here is, if I select individual, I can select different target heights for, you know, my left, center, and right. I could put in different heights there, or I can do just match center frame. And center frame control. Okay, the simulator's not working here, but these, oh yeah it is, it's just not very visible here. The wings will gray out, and then I can just target in one height and it'll match it all the way across the boom. So if I go back to an individual control, it can become ungrayed, so I can put this one at 60, I can put this one at 36, and it'll keep those maintained heights at those sensor levels. So if you got a 5 sensor system, it's taken 2. Mark, your battery kind of died on me. Okay, there we go. So on my sensors, if I got a 5 sensor system, left wing, you've got 2 sensors trying to monitor that height. The center section is going to just have the one in the center frame. That's actually going to do it. And then your right side will have the other 2 sensors. In a 3 sensor system, you just have one for each to target that height. Okay.
Ty, for your booms though, would you put a 5 sensor on a 90 foot or just mainly when you're looking at the 100?
Say that again, Daryl.
On your boom length, width?
Yep.
Would you just put 5 sections on, or, yeah, 5 on a 120?
Yeah.
Rather
Yep.
than a
Yep. I think when you go to 120, 5 sensor is mandatory. And as we go into the new 4 series sprayer, it's none or 5. There's no 3 sensor option.
The target height is where it's going to spray above your canopy or wherever it's reading, right?
Well, that's going to be at your boom height. So your bottom of your boom to the ground, that's going to be your boom height. So if you want to change that to, you know, you're trying to catch that canopy at a certain height, then you got to take into account what is your crop height too.
If you're running a draw nozzle, then you gotta calculate that in as well.
Correct. So if you're doing boom track and you got 36-inch drop nozzles and you're spraying at 30 inches, your nozzles are going to drag on the ground.
That number's to the ground regardless whether you have a set canopy.
Yep.
or the ground.
Yep. What this does is just saying, what is my crop? So is it got a canopy to it, or are you just doing pre-emerge or post-emerge spraying kind of? So it kind of gives you a different aspect of that machine.
So that's gonna depend upon your nozzles too then, right?
Yep. So your nozzles, nozzle spacing, yep, your span. I mean, there's a lot of variables here that you're gonna have to start taking into account what you're trying to do. Usually is when you're doing it without boom track, you always have that one set height. Go out and measure it, plug that in there, maybe add a couple inches to take in some variables, and then you're pretty well targeted on that height. Good questions. A couple other things as we go from the 30 series sprayers into the new 4 series sprayers, the boom has been redesigned completely, okay? 30 series, 20 series, 10 series, aughts, whatever we just had that single pillow block bearing in the back that the whole boom just pivoted on back and forth. As we go to the new 4 series sprayer, there's 4 points of connection. It's more like a pendulum swing. So if you did any headline turns on like a 30 series, if you turned too hard or too aggressive, what happened to your one wing? You'd put her in the dirt pretty easily. The new style with the pendulum swing, it's a little bit harder to do. I would say it's very, very hard to do. I spent all day in Florida in level ground, of course, and I tried to put a 120-foot boom at 15 miles an hour into the ground on a turn, and I struggled to do it. I think I did it once, and I had to really, really get on that wheel to make it happen. Not very often are you really on that wheel really hard to turn around and go back. So, because usually you have to kind of turn, drive a little bit, and then turn aggressive again. So It takes, and that was at about 2 feet of height. So that boom will not try to swing down in the ground. It'll actually try to almost kind of swing out instead of down. Now the next question, everybody's like, well, what about your spray? It's not going to swing back and forth like this as you go down the field. It's got springs to it to give it some resistance so it doesn't want to try to swing back and forth. Okay? You do have to enable it here. With it, once you enable it, just like auto track, we've been really familiar with, we get a nice little pie graph. You know, 1 pie graph, it's installed, no system, or 2, it's enabled, boom track active is 4, and then like 3, no system faults. So once you press the 1 on your hydro handle, the thing will activate from 3 to the 4, and it's all active. When you do activate it here, when I do activate the boom track here, on your main screen here, the indicators will all turn green, and then the boom will activate and get to those target heights, okay? And it should, once you activate it and you're in the field and you activate it, it should just stay in that position. It shouldn't start dancing. If it starts dancing, we got to take a look at a few things. One, the calibration of the sensors. You can't just plug them in and go. There's serial numbers and calibrations where you have to enter in the display. Dennis, you're probably pretty familiar with that. The other thing is they don't work over water, and they don't work very well on concrete or driveways. I've seen some driveways with a heavy gravel pack that the sensors don't like it, and they start dancing quite a bit. The best thing is to back over some grass or a lawn, and it actually works a lot better, and you can find out whether you actually have a problem or not. The best is usually pulling out in the field, get away from the headlands, and see where you're at. That'll give you the best feel and look of what you're actually trying to be doing. Okay? As for setup here, soft key G, this will get us all into our spray setup here. So my first tab, my spray setup here, first off I have all my different rates. So once again I can go in here and change my physical rates in each one to target that of what I want to achieve. Okay? So I have kind of 2 different spots to go in there and look at it. This is kind of more of pre-season setup. Before I get out, before I put my first tank load of solution in it, I go in here and make sure all the settings are. Next here I have my minimal spray pressure. Well, what is minimal spray pressure? Well, something like that.
If you go too, it's only gonna, you can only go so slow.
Yep. So what minimal spray pressure is we have check valves in our nozzle bodies. Okay, the standard equipped one coming out of the factory is a 12 psi check. There are some other variations in there. There's some 18s, 25s, and 29 psi. They're different color, so you know which one you have. Greens are the 12 psi. I can't remember the other ones. I know 29 psi is like red, and then there's a black one which is like 18, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but what I want to do is I want to target this 2 to 3 psi higher than my check valves. Okay, what those check valves do is as I drop my, say I turn off my sprayer, turn off the master switch, I want those nozzles to stop. So if I go to fold up and drive down the road, I don't want them dripping down on the road, correct? EPA would just have a heyday with us if we had that going on every day. So what this does is this will help maintain the system pressure in there to keep it above that. So if you slow down too much, you slow down way too much there, and you're actually in the field spraying, you don't want them to shut off. Okay, so if I got a 12 psi check valve and I don't have a minimal spray pressure, it's going to start shutting off nozzles. So if you look at a boom, you know anything about fluid and pressure, that or any reliefs, do they always stop and start exactly at their rated? No. Okay, this is where if I got a 12 psi check valve and I put a minimal spray pressure in there of 12, I could have some nozzles that will turn off and some will stay on, depending on age, acres, things like that, different variables in there. So I always want to be slightly above, which I always say about 2 to 3 psi greater than your check valves in the system. This way you can ensure that your nozzles are going to stay on and your swath is going to be fully covered. They do wear out over time. So you could have, you may need to replace these over time. Now there's no real age limit or acres or amount of acres, but typically I'd say to guys that in 3 to 5 years you should be probably replacing those typically. And if you're having a lot of issues, definitely replace them. You can get some erratic rates, things like that, and there's some other factors in there too, but those are something to be looking at after so long. I mean, you start running different chemicals through there, you can degrade some of those. Yeah.
Are they right at the nozzle then, or are they in that?
Yep, so there's a green cap on there, and the cap should determine the check valve, but not always. So you got the nozzle bodies around, and then you got a side green cap that comes out perpendicular. You unscrew that cap, and that's where that check valve's at. Once you take it out and you see that rubber diaphragm in there, what color it is going to determine what PSI it's going to be. The green cap's supposed to determine what check valves you are, but don't always count on that because you can take it off and put a different check valve in there at any point in time, and then you could be.
Sell those separately, because I bought the whole unit the other day.
Yeah, they do. It's a separate part through Hypro. There's a sprayer catalog that we have. The dealer parts counter guys have access to it. Sales guys have. Everybody has access to it, and you can go in there and actually look at it.
Ty, you want to go a little further on that with waterways? You know, when you're approaching a waterway, you're going to get a little drip on that. And
Yep.
over the last 3-4 years, you know, the induction valve
Yep.
on each end of the spray bodies, you know, that seemed to help that a lot. Like you said, each tip is going to shut off and turn on so different. So what that does is it purges the air.
Yep.
We've noticed a little dribble through waterways before.
So one thing is you got to look at your check valve, make sure it's still working properly. So that could be signs, the dribble is signs that the check valve is starting to break down or be weak.
I've actually had, when I've been cruising at my full speed, and we have waterways maps and so forth where everything's supposed to shut off.
Yep.
I've had sections of my boot not even shut off.
So there's some other things we need to look at that from a swath control or section control perspective of what is your overlaps and all that, whether it's percentage, minimize, or anything like that. We could have some potential issues where you want to maximize your coverage, and it's going to wait till it'll wait till 100% of the boom gets across before it'll shut off. And if your waterways are narrow, it'll never shut off because your coverage is.
If I slow it down to where, half speed, then they usually shut off.
Yep. Yeah. So your coverage can be a little bit piece of that too. And your turn on, turn off times can also play into the fact. So there's a lot of variables here that you can be playing with. Next here is my spray off pressure. So what this is when I turn my solution pump on, this is the pressure that it's going to maintain in the system. So as I turn on the system, I turn on my solution pump, I'm targeting 40 PSI. So when I hit my master spray to the off position, so I was spraying and I hit master off, it's going to target 40 PSI. Where I want to leave the spray off pressure is relative to where I'm actually going to be spraying. Okay? So if I'm spraying at 60 PSI, I kind of don't want to leave this at 40 PSI. I want to leave it at or slightly above where I'm actually spraying. Because when I'm at a spray off pressure, say I'm spraying at 60 and I leave that at 60, for example, and I turn on my master spray switch, what happens to my pressure in my system when I open everything up? It drops it. Okay? To get a more accurate coverage throughout your field, you want to be slightly above. So if I'm slightly above where I'm spraying at, when I dump off and open everything up, it's going to kind of keep it relative to where I'm spraying. Because if I keep it relative to where I'm spraying, then what happens with my rate if I go too low or too high? It ain't right. So if I stay relatively close, then it should be more precise. So your coverage is a lot better if you're slightly above. So when you turn on that master, it's actually going to dump off just a little bit. And then it'll be able to easily get back to where you're targeted at when you're spraying. The other things is spray off pressure. We have agitation on the machine. Okay? With agitation, this is where agitation comes into play. So I can adjust that with a manual ball valve on the side. Now we get in the new 4 Series, I can do it all from the cab, which is kind of nice. Now I don't have to go back there and adjust that valve. If I get too high of a spray off pressure and I got agitation wide open, what can I start doing to the chemical inside the tank? Foaming. I start putting foam in my tank, what happens to the system? What did I just introduce to the system? Air. What's air like to do with a pressurized system? Yep. You don't know what it's going to do. So your rate starts to become very erratic. We got to make sure we bleed all the air out of the booms before we start spraying, because otherwise that rate starts jumping up and down. We can't get it to level off. My rates can either over or under apply, and now I have misses in my field. Okay? So I'm missing my target. So make sure that you know where you're at spraying. What is your chemical? I know there's anti-foam agents out there and things like that, but some of them, do they always really work 100%? You're still going to get some foaming regardless. So be careful of not getting this too high and making sure that you know where your actual agitation valve is, whether it's wide open or cracked. Other things that can come into play too, because when you're spraying your agitation valve, one thing we know about fluid is path of least resistance, right? So if I got my thing wide open and I can't achieve a high rate, say I'm doing 28% with my sprayer, first question when I got this, when I started doing a lot of customer visits, is like, I can't achieve this rate, I'm putting 28% down, I just can't do it. And I said, is your agitation on? They go, yes. And I said, where's the valve at? Wide open. I'm trying to mix in some Roundup with my 28. I said, shut it off. They shut it off, they go to spray it, and everything meets. Okay? So then, just simple little things like that can just create havoc with the system by just having that agitation on and running high rates. Usually you see it a lot with the higher rates. The smaller rates, you got to remember, that's only going about 10 feet instead of going up to a 90-foot boom. So some variations there. Next here, tank volume fill. So what size tank do you have? So when you actually go back into your main page, so I'll jump back. If you got a 4730, you're going to type in 800 gallons. If you got a 4830, you're going to type in 1000. 49, you're going to type in 1200. You can do also a tank volume reset. So I can change in there, say I only want to put 800 gallons in there. It's going to let you know what you have in there. So if you had to do a small batch or something like that and you want to know where you're at, then the system will start giving you alarms when you start getting down to zero. Okay? One thing we don't want to do with any one of our sprayers is run the pump dry. Okay? We fight this a lot from the factory perspective. Our pumps, if you run them roughly 8 to 10 seconds with no water, you burned out the seals and the thing will either A, leak, or you'll burn out the whole pump. The solution is actually kind of our cooling agent to that pump to keep that thing cooler. So just be aware that if you start running the pump dry a lot, you can wear through your pump a lot faster. Anybody ever had to replace a solution pump on these things before? No? Good job. I'm going to give you that one. If you have to replace it, you're looking at anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000. Depending on what kind of size pump you have, what options, whether you have this normal steel casting or you have a stainless steel pump option out there too, they can get pretty pricey pretty quick. So be aware that if you start running your pump dry, you're like, I got 100 feet left in this pass and I'm getting the warning. Do I risk it or do I not? Okay, so you got to kind of play the game there a little bit of what are you trying to do and how much you actually physically have in there. Because as this thing counts down, as that on the main spray page, as it counts down, it's taking a rough estimate. There's no actual float in there to see where you're physically at. It's taking a rough estimate of your GPM flow out and counting that down through the controller. So it's not a physical measurement in the tank. It's a calculated measurement. So be careful.
If you're going to spray out 800 gallons, do you add a buffer to it?
You can.
20 gallons or whatever?
You can. When you fill the tank and you look at the gauge that's a rough estimate because it's just a ball and a float deal. So you're taking a rough guess of what you physically put in the tank. Could you be off 50 gallons? Oh yeah, you could be off 50 gallons. You could have pumped in 850 and you plug in 800, okay, you might be all right. But say you said you pumped in 800, your tank was sitting a little bit crooked or something, and you actually only pumped in 750. You could run out sooner than you really thought. So there is some variance of where you're filling and what that gauge is saying. As we get into the 4 series with target fill for that option, it's pretty darn close, but once again, it doesn't take into account the tilt of that machine. So make sure you're on level ground and you should be pretty accurate or pretty close. Next here, we have high flow rates. You might have dual flow meters on the machine or high flow. You got it? Okay. If I have dual flow meters, I can check that box, and then one, I want to check the box if I'm doing a high flow rate. Two, I got to go back to the back of the center section, and I actually have to turn on the valve to turn on that second flow meter. Okay. This is telling the controller that I'm looking at 2 flow meters. The valve in the back is you're physically doing it. Okay. There's no electronic thing, so if the box is checked and you're trying to put out a rate, but the valve is closed, what's your rate actually doing? It's half of what it should be, right? Because you're taking a calculation of 2 flow meters. So if you're taking 2 flow meters and you're only running fluid through one of them, the other one's reading 0, it's going to take half of what it is. Okay? So if you get, I've seen this complaint a few times, especially early in the year when they're going to 28%, and then they, after preseason spray, going into other sprays, they're like, well, I shut the valve off, but the box was still checked. Like, well, my rate's not coming out. Well, what's this looking like? So just be aware, you still have a physical check and a controller check on this to make sure that you got 2 flow meters or 1, and whether you're using both or just 1. Okay. Spray system min-max. This is given the ability to how fast I want my controller to think. I have selection 1 through 5, 1 being the least reactive, 5 being the most reactive. Similar to Boom Track. 5 is good, but if you're doing a lot of precision prescriptions, it can create a little bit of havoc in there being on 5. Most of the time I tell guys put it at 3 and leave it. It's about the best you can do. Some guys will bump it to 5, but then they usually get some, when they get in prescriptions, smaller grids, they start getting a lot of adjusting, and it doesn't want to fine tune as quick as you want to your grids. So I tell them to change it to 3, and they have a lot more smoother change in between their grids on their prescriptions. Most sprayers usually set up, Dennis, I think you probably leave it at 3. Standard default from the factory is 3. 3 is usually where I always make sure. That way too, if I'm going out and diagnosing a machine, I put it at 3 to make sure I know exactly where I need to head with this machine quick. Whether it's solution pump, hydraulics, air in the system, whatever direction I want to go, I want to see an even keel first before I start going after some things. Because if it's reacting to itself, I might not be able to pinpoint the area quick enough to find out that I have a problem somewhere. So I want to try to get it from reacting to itself. Next here, boom charge. This is probably the easiest and hardest one to explain, if you want to put it that way. I have 3 choices, off, manual, and auto. Well, first off, what is boom charge? You guys ever read it in the OM? Just out of curiosity. Have you ever opened the OM? Breaks warranty, right? It's usually, I heard that comment once. He goes, no, it voids warranty if I open the OM. No, it does not.
Just another man's opinion.
Yep, it's just another man's opinion. That's another good way of putting it. So what boom charge is? Boom charge is what is the system doing for 3 seconds after I press the master spray switch. In the off position, in the off position, I go to turn it back on, the master spray switch on, so I have off selected in here. I turn the master spray switch on. It is going to do whatever it needs to do to get up to its rate at any point in time. If I turn it off and then turn it back on, it's going to do the same thing. And it's only going to do it for 3 seconds. If I go to a manual selection, it is going to look at your manual targeted pressure in your display that you have set. Whether you're doing a rate or a prescription, it is going to look at that targeted manual pressure for 3 seconds once you press the master spray switch on. So if I had been spraying at 45, 50 PSI all day long, and I had a manual setting in there at 90 PSI, and every time I hit the master spray switch, it goes on for 3 seconds, it goes to 90 PSI, and then it'll go back to your rate. What have I just done? Clean your nozzles out for one. Have I over applied probably? you probably doubled up your application a little bit. So this boom charge is only looking at the first 3 seconds after I hit the master spray switch. Only 3 seconds, and then it's going to go back to whatever your selection is. It's kind of pop at you a little bit and open up. So last thing here on this page, alarm setups, flow rate alarm or section off alarm. I kind of leave this up to you guys of how much alarms or beeping can you handle in the cab. I know our displays like to kind of beep at you and tell you when we're not doing things right or wrong. This is up to you. Usually the flow rate alarm though, I definitely want to check for sure, because this is kind of going after my rate. I want to make sure that whether I'm on target or off target. Okay. Section alarm, if I have a section go down and it comes offline, I want to make sure I know that it came offline. We can only roughly see about 2 or 3 sections on either side. We can't really see the one right behind us. So that's always good to know when that section shut off unexpectedly or intended. Okay. Any questions on this page? Okay. Boom setup. This is a very critical thing to do, and just also on a new sprayer is very important. This should be all done. Dennis, you would be the one, or the tech at the shop would be the one to make sure this is all set up correctly. It should be set up correctly at the factory when they download everything to the controllers, but I have seen a few that are a little bit off. So this is physically telling the controller, the SRC, so our spray rate controller on the machine, this is physically telling them exactly what I have set up on that boom. I got to tell it, what is my section width? How many nozzles do I have? What is my nozzle spacing? And what is my spray width of my nozzles? This is getting plugged into the SRC, so when I start wanting to achieve a gallons per acre rate, it knows what I should be seeing there for GPMs and pressures and things like that. So it knows. So you physically got to go out there, count your center section, figure out how many you got, and then you can do, the easiest way is do one wing and then reciprocate it for the other wing, because they should match. They shouldn't be different. If they're different, then you got problems. So you got to physically go out there, count the number of nozzles, count your number of spacings. So 15s, 20s, customs, whatever you got. Spray width of that nozzle usually typically matches what your nozzle spacing is, unless you're doing some banding and things like that can kind of change this. And then your physical spray width of that section. So your section is your section switches. So you could either have 5, 7, or 11 now with 4940. You can have that, or the new 4 Series when you get a 120-foot boom. So giving you your amount of sections. How to change it, you come down here, L1. So we're dealing with this section right here. L1, what's my nozzles, my spacing, and my nozzle spray width. And then it'll calculate out what my maximum spray width is going to be. And then you just got to select each one and go through it one by one, make sure you're matching up. Okay? Double check this every time you go in there before you start spraying to make sure nothing happened over the winter. Very rarely do I ever see one that gets goofed up over the winter, but it does happen occasionally. Electricity, we all know things about electricity, that it's the wiki that likes to do what it wants at times, right? Vehicle setup here. I can do my service intervals here. You guys really use this page for your service, oils, things like that, grease times, anything? Kind of surveying the customers I did visit, there's a fair amount that actually use it pretty religiously. There's some guys that just don't. No offense if you don't. If you do, hey, that's great. It's there for your taking 50, 100, 250, or 500 hour intervals. It's good to use. Do the change. So say you do the 250 for your engine oil, you can go in and zero it, and then it'll set an alarm once it reaches 250 hours again, and then you know you got to change the oil. So usually you always got to write down on, I think we had a thing in the shop, I had a nice shelf, wood shelf there, and I wrote down it on there when I changed oil and what tractor and the date, the hours and things like that. This is kind of just an easy way of doing it. The machine's doing it for you. Next down here we have the vehicle speed selection. I have 3 selections: wheel speed, radar, and GPS. You guys all on GPS? Okay. GPS should be selected in here. That's your best way to get your speed. Okay. No variables in here that can really take it in play, because it knows the last time it pinged itself, so it knows how fast it took you and what the distance you went to achieve that speed. So radar is the best, or GPS is the best. Wheel speed and radar, you can have radar in the machines. It is an option. Don't see too much of a take rate in the Midwest or the upper Midwest or in the prairies. Usually they get the GPS and the wheel speed. Wheel speed is standard on all the machines. But the difference is radar. The guys in the Delta like it. One is the coverage there for GPS. They got a lot of smaller fields, tree lines, things like that. You can lose GPS signal. They got wetter fields, so when we come to wetter fields, we really have a lot of debris kind of floating around in the base there at the radar and give us faulty signals. It's kind of the downside with radar. Dry, dusty conditions, a lot of no-till options now today. You get that corn residue from the previous year or soybean residue. It can kind of go across the sensor and give you a false reading. So if I give a false reading on speed to my controller, what happens to my rate? It changes. So wheel speed, the one thing it does not take into account is wheel slip. So if I start spinning out on my left front wheel, say I was driving 12 miles an hour and all of a sudden my left front wheel, for example, spins out and all of a sudden starts spinning at 16 miles an hour, but physically I'm only going about 2 or 3. Now the machine thinks it's going 16, but in reality you're only going 2. Now I've over applied big time pretty quick. So on a 47, 10, 20 or 30 and the 4830, you have one wheel speed sensor. It's in the left front wheel corner. Okay. On the new sprayers, you have 2. You're guaranteed 2, and they're on both on the rears. If you have slip control, you have 4. Each wheel motor will have a speed sensor on it, and it takes an average of all 4 to give you your speed. So it gives you most accuracy. Kind of moves me into the next point here with this wheel slip control. Wheel slip control is only for the new 4 Series sprayers or a 4900 Series chassis. What this does is, and it's different than a 47 or 4830 with traction control on it. Okay? Wheel slip, I have 4 variable displacement motors on it, so I can control those with a controller on the machine, a chassis controller, and I can change the actual speed of those wheel motors to help adjust to my conditions. When the box is checked, it's going to look at all 4 speeds together, and if I start slowing down and it sees one is starting to go faster than the other one, it's going to start taking that wheel motor and shutting it down to slow it down to move the resistance to another wheel. So how our powertrain system works. We have 2 hydro pumps, 4 wheel motors. Front hydro pump is right front, left rear. Rear pump is left front, right rear. So I have 2 wheel motors sharing 1 pump. So in a wheel slip control, I'm going to tell one wheel motor, say my left front is spinning out, it's going to start shutting it down to slow it down and divert oil to the right rear to help get me through that sticky situation. You look at our sprayers, is it a 4-wheel drive machine? No. What's one thing about oil again? Path of least resistance, right? So it's going to divert the oil to whatever one is the easiest one to make it turn and spin. The other one's just kind of along for the ride then in that system. Make sense? Traction control, it works a little bit different. Now it's using a pressure compensated system, or not pressure compensated, pressure style system, kind of similar to like a brake system. You got the diverter valve in there, it's going to just start shuttling that valve to whatever one, close it off to try to divert oil to the least pressurized system, or a higher pressurized system to try to get that one to turn and shut down the other one. So it's truly a mechanical version. This is electronic. Okay, so that's the difference. 4 Series sprayers, slip controls throughout because the powertrain system is the same through the 3 models except for the R4023. That's a whole another can of worms. That's still back in traction control. Drivetrain setting, 1, 2, or 3. 2 is usually kind of where the base is. Leave them where I set them up personally. 2 is usually kind of the happy medium. 3, you can get some little goofy. There's a lot of guys out there running 3, but it doesn't create too much havoc. This is only for the 4940 or 4900 Series chassis or the new 4 Series sprayers where you can actually adjust and change this. Okay. Questions, comments on setup? Good? How am I doing on time here, Mark? Good?
Yeah, you're doing good. How much time do you got?
Probably about 10 minutes, roughly, give or take on the questions. Go through calibrations here real quick. Soft key H. So I have my calibrations in here. These should all stay in here over winter. They shouldn't change. Flow meter cal, just double check. There should be a tag on each flow meter. What gives you a calibration number that you got to plug into the display. This is going to give you the ability to give you the most accurate GPM. They're all tested at factory, given a cal number. We got to tell the controller what that cal number is so it can make the calculation. It will timestamp them as well. So I know when the last time it actually was calibrated or looked at. So if you look at it after a month or so, just go back and recal it. So anytime you go back in here, say the calibration was 100, I would say it was actually 107, whatever. I accept. Now it timestamped it today and what time it actually did. Difference between, so if you got a high flow system, you got two cal numbers. Tell the difference. Flow meter 1 is the closest to the cab. Flow meter 2 is the farthest from the cab. So make sure you don't get them swapped because then your flows can change. pressure calibration. This one's all going to depend how much spraying you do. Typically, I always say at least zero it out for sure every spring. If you do a lot of spraying after pre-season spraying, zero it out before you get into post-emerge spraying. And if you do anything again later in the year for second application like aphids, things like that, then maybe zero it again. If you're doing a lot of acres like co-ops, I tell them to do it kind of almost on a bi-weekly to monthly basis for sure. That way you know for sure where you're at, because they can change. Systems wear out, wear in, break in. One thing to note, make sure everything is open and it is truly zero. So make sure all the valves are open. Physically almost just go take a line off so you know that the thing should be reading zero. Yes?
So in those numbers, 719, that's gallons per minute?
No, it's a calibrated constant that they give for that. I'm not sure exactly what they really go after. It's just...
But the higher the number, the higher the capacity of that flow meter?
Not necessarily, because we used to have like 900, now they're down to like 200 for cal numbers.
So there's just a tag right on the meter?
Yep. Yep. When they do PDI, Dennis, you would know that they would be on the sprayer, and when we build them at the factory, those tags are supposed to get tied onto the corner post harness.
So I had another concern, we should be calibrating with fresh water too.
Yep, I'm getting to that, so, yep. So, making sure this is zeroed out, once again, it'll tell you when the last zeroed it out. Once you go through the calibration, it'll re-timestamp it to the most recent time. Solution pump calibration, this is critical, and I usually always leave it to the technicians to do it or recommend when doing it. This one should be done annually, for sure annually. If you're doing a lot of corrosive chemicals like the guys in Texas and Cotton Country, they do a lot of defoliants, so acid, I tell them to do that one almost about once a month. Because acid does a lot of goofy things to a lot of different things. Things change. For this calibration, one, I got to have my oil temperature, hydraulic oil temperature up to at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit or above. Two, I want to calibrate with water in the system. Water is your most base mixing of chemical. Some guys do put chemical with 28%. You can calibrate at that, but water will still give you the most accurate reading. Okay? You got to have those met before you can go through a cal. Once you go through a cal, you meet those requirements, you have water in the tank, you have the hydraulic oil temp to 140 degrees, then you can go through the calibration, it'll step you through it, you click the cal button, it's going to turn the pump on, it'll give you an amp reading at 3 psi, and it'll give you an amp reading at 150 psi, and that psi is based on your solution pressure sensor. So if that's off, your solution pump cal can be off. Okay? Once it calculates, it'll give you a time. It'll also give you some values here for A and B. What this is really your amp current value for your 3 psi and your 150 psi. Okay? And then this is my duty cycle of that PWM valve that's controlling that solution pump. So there's kind of a little, I like to tell guys that try to leave it to the tech to do it, or if he recommends when you do it, try not to do it with chemical mixtures in the tank, because that can throw your calibration off a little bit if you go to switch to a different chemical. Okay? So I can play with it. ACD value, this is really what my average is. So when I was talking about that boom charge, it's looking at this value right here. This is a GPM flow, pressure, and a constant built into the controller. That's what's giving you your average. It's probably about as basic as I can get to it. Otherwise, we're going to get really in depth. Once again, I'll timestamp it. Like I said, do this one for sure every spring before you get going. If you change anything in the system hydraulically, you got to recalibrate. So if you replace the PWM, the compensator, control valve within the hydraulic system, part of that solution system, do the calibration again because things have changed. Okay? Change out a solution pump, do the calibration. You went from an old one to a new one, so there's some differences there in the resistance of the impeller and all that. Okay? I'll get to that last button here in a second. Turn to height calibration. Just once again, hydraulic oil temp up and above the 145. This one here, since it's a 49, it has boom fold sensors on it. We want to make sure we calibrate it. This should already be all done before you guys get the machine brand new. You can do them every year if you want. That's up to you. This is not very, very critical calibration to do, but it should be done. Usually I'd never had really any bad things if you haven't done it for a couple years. If I start seeing some goofy things, I might go and change it just to make sure I'm not dealing with something off the wall. So, vehicle calibration, wheel speed sensor, that's driving a 400-foot course. This should be done. You can do it annually. The one thing I note on this one here is if you do a lot of road transport, so you're driving 10, 20, 30 miles, I tell guys to do this, especially maybe even 2 times a year. Co-ops, I tell them to definitely do it 3 times a year, at least on a monthly basis. Because especially if you're driving a lot of road travel, you're burning the tires off, and that can change your rolling radius. Okay? Radar sensor, if you have it, simple cal, 400-foot course again. Hydro handle calibration is for 4900 series chassis because we're looking at cruise control features in the new 4 series. All that calibration is pulling it out, going all the way forward with the handle and all the way back so that it knows that where that potentiometer is for a cruise control feature. Auto track calibration, do this one in the field and the oil is at operating temperature. Okay? This one you can do on an annual basis as well. If you don't put very many acres on, you really don't have to do it. I mean, if you're at a couple thousand a year, you can get by every 2 to 3 years on that one. Unless you change something in the system, then you would go back and recalibrate. Tread adjust, this is only for the new 4 series sprayers and 4900 series because I actually can do it within the display. On the OTS 10s, 20s, and 30 series, I just had those manual gauges out there, right, that you know where you're at. So I wouldn't have this calibration there. Boom track calibrations, where's my level position and my hydraulic valves. Once again, I got to have my hydraulic oil temp up at operating temperature or slightly higher. Usually on a lot of these calibrations, I like to try to get the machine as hot as I can to where I'm normally operating the machine at. Because if I do it then I get the most accuracy when I'm actually running the machine. If I do it when it's cold, then I start getting into warm oil. Things like to go, we have different leak buys when it's cold versus warm because the oil viscosity changes. So try to do it where it's hot, really hot, and that'll give you better results when you get into auto track, boom track, things like that. Okay. Last but not least, the one button I never touched on all these pages, right? Reset back to default settings. Do not ever, 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 ever touch that button. Okay? If you want to have to blow an afternoon of recalibrating your machine, go ahead. If you want to practice at it. I have only done this once in the 5 years that I've dealt with sprayers that I've ever tried that button, and it didn't get me any further than I really wanted. Okay? It really much caused me more pain and headache than it actually did in helping me. My big push was try to get this for the factory to take it out. They will not, engineer will not take it out because they want it there for some goofy feature. Don't ask me why, but I made a beg, plead, and steal when we were developing the 4 series sprayer to get it out of there. They would not take it out. I took my other battles elsewhere because that wasn't too dire, but it will ask you once you press the button, are you sure you want to do this? Make sure you hit cancel quick. Do not go through that because it's going to cause you a lot of pain and headache. Okay? Any questions with calibrations? This is about the only time the technician can catch you on whether you actually did it or not. okay? The only time we can actually catch it. Acres counter here, soft key I. I can do my area counter, my distance counter. I can do some job summaries if I'm doing some custom spraying, or I just want to kind of know where I'm at for acreage. Lifetime, what has that sprayer actually done in its lifetime? You can't zero these, you can't adjust it, you can't change it. It's just taking the totals and averaging them out. Good thing to look at is, what is your acres per hour? How efficient are you, okay? Your spray hours, your total acres, your gallons, your average gallons per acre, and gallons per hour, okay? This one's probably the most interesting to look at. Just look at that once in your lifetime totals. See what you've done with that sprayer. It'll give you the most pretty accurate information, because you can figure out, how efficient am I? Where can I make improvements? Where can I get this from 75 acres to an hour up to 150? Typical guys around Wisconsin are around that 70 to 90 acres per hour on an average from the machines that I've seen and the data that I've taken. Texas, 150 plus. But what's their field difference? Yep. Australia, 260 I saw. But we're talking 5 mile by 5 mile field. Brazil's the same way. Large fields they can go. So their acre per hour is pretty large. So it's just some things to look at. See how efficient you are with your operation. It's good to look at. Diagnostics here. Readings, I can look at different aspects of my machine. One I always like to look at here is my drivetrain. What is my drivetrain? What am I seeing electronically? Customers, you guys probably won't get into this too much, but it's some simple things that you want to know. So say Dennis or one of the techs from Frontier calls you, or you call them saying, hey, I got an issue. They can point you to this page and tell you what they're reading, and maybe we can find out some things that maybe a sensor's not reading at all, or maybe I'm pressing a button. I can go to my cab. I can see whether the switches are on or off. If I flip the switch off and it's still reading on, okay, I got a problem. If I switch it on and it's still reading off, I got a problem. So something very simple diagnostics to kind of look at and see what that sprayer is doing for you. Test, nozzle flow check test. This one's really good. This can kind of give you the ability to type in a target speed, whether you want to do a manual pressure or your target rate. And you can turn on your solution pump, turn on your master spray, and see if either A, I can achieve it, or B, I just got to go out and check my nozzles. Are they still working the way they're supposed to be working? Are they worn out? Are they plugged? Are they doing what they need to? Are they prorated to where they need to be at? Okay, simple checks. You can do a lot of different things with this. You say you see a storm cloud coming in. Can I achieve a couple more miles per hour and still be able to take my rate on like I wanted to? Am I going to be able to achieve that? So just some simple little things there to check with. Recent problems, just some diagnostic codes. What is triggered, what hasn't. Kind of more for the tech side of things to see where you're at. Controller diagnostics. I can pin out some controllers for software, things like that. Guys will probably not be into this unless the tech asks you, what software version you are. We do like to change our software packages every so often to make updates and improvements. Maybe we're having issues. Hey, a new update, maybe you need the new update. Maybe you're running older software, okay?
Hey, Ty?
Yes?
Back to that nozzle check, when we
Yep.
were down in Florida, they showed us, Deere's got a great little tool for checking your nozzle. That's like $50 or something like that. That's a
Yep.
great little tool.
Yep, yeah.
With the electronic sensors, it's got the,
You hold it under there.
Yep, that's all through HiPro. You can get it through your HiPro, and you guys should all know who your HiPro contact is as well. If you don't, let me know. I can get you that information too.
Tips where they're expensive.
Oh yeah.
what
Yeah.
about nozzle selection? That seems to always be a topic of conversation.
So from a deer perspective, we do not recommend nozzles. Talk to your agronomist. Dennis should know how to calculate a nozzle and to achieve to see what you're trying to achieve for diagnostic purpose only, not for recommendations. Okay? There's a tool out there on Parts Expert. You guys have access to it. You guys can get them a copy. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, and you can figure out what nozzles you need to buy. You can plug in all your information. What's your speed, what's your pressure, and what's your application rate. Okay? Plug that all in, and it'll spit out a bunch of nozzles for you to see. As we get into new 4 Series sprayers, it's actually built into the display. So I can go into my display and select nozzles. It'll give you the numbers and everything, what colors, what sizes, things like that. But once again, that's only suggestions. Agronomist for the best application.
And those nozzle checks and stuff like that, as far as, you know, the parts that you're talking about, is really been simplified over the years. And
Yeah.
your dealers, Frontier Ag and Turf would be able to supply the nozzles for you.
Yep. You guys, with the sprayers that you guys own, you probably have a slide rule in there. You guys ever seen that? Hopefully, maybe. If you bought it new, it should have been in there. If you bought it used, it's probably gone. But there is this old slide rule that we have. I got a couple left in my back pocket, I guess. Actually, I left it at the office or back at the house. But it's a slide rule. It does the same exact thing. The electronic version is a quick and simple way to just plug in your numbers and it'll kick it out. I can do it the long way and using the calculator between your ears. My old FFA advisor always said, use the calculator between your ears and you just figure it out real quick. It's just this little slide rule and you pick out what your speed, what your pressure is, what's your density of your water. Huh? Oh yeah. I'm actually getting pretty good at it, sadly enough. So, anybody ask me questions, I actually bring out the slide rule before I bring up the electronic copy. So, first time I use it, I'm like, ooh, how's this work? And then once you get used to it, you just kind of funnel through it pretty quick. So, good question. A couple other features here as we get into solution command on 4 Series or 49er Series chassis. We have the ability to do all my rinsing automatically. I can come in here whether I want to do a boom rinse or a solution system rinse. How many rinses do I want to do? The volume of water I want to do, low, medium, or high. And I can just start the rinse and it'll go through the whole cycle and then it'll say spray off. You need to spray off. This is where you physically have to drive the machine, hit your master spray, and spray that water out. I will note, if you're on a triple rinse, high volume, you will burn through all 150 gallons of your water pretty quick. Okay? It'll go through all, if you did a triple higher volume rinse, you're out of rinse water, as long as your tank was full. You can use rinsing agents, that's fine. I always say the more rinsing, the better off you are to get the chemicals out, clean them out as best you can. There is some new changes to the boom. Now with the new 4 Series, I can actually do a boom air purge. So say I got done spraying at the end of the day, I still got 500 gallons in, I want to just clean out my booms, and instead of letting it settle out and gum up and all that, I can shoot air through those boom sections and spray it. I would say you get about 85% of the chemical and water out of those booms by just doing a boom air purge. And then you don't have to worry about contaminating your water tank with rinse water and figure out, okay, where am I at on my water to chemical ratio. This is only for 4900 Series chassis or the new 4 Series sprayers. I can do just a boom rinse, but just remember, if you do just a boom rinse, you're still potentially can get rinse water from your rinse tank into your solution tank, okay? Just for knowledge, so when we go bring the sprayer to Europe, we did have to do some testing on it to figure out how many rinses does it take to clean out the system. And what they use is a copper sulfate mix. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with copper sulfate, but one, it's kind of corrosive, and two, it's very residual. Huh? Yeah, it's very residual, and on a 4830, it takes 9 rinse cycles before it gets down to a specific level that the EPA regulates in Europe to say that they're actually clean. So just so you know where you're at, and that's just using true just rinse water. So 9 cycles, that's a fair amount. That test stinks to do.
Wouldn't that vary though, depending upon if you had like stainless boom sections or?
It will, but we have the base test that we have to do to check the box for Europe is we can do poly, we got to do poly, and we got to do stainless, but I know stainless is 9 cycles. So you're talking a lot, and that's just purely rinse water. There's no additives for rinse agents or anything like that. Also with the new sprayers, we have the end cap aspirators. So one helps keep keep the air out of the boom, and 2, when it gets to those end of those boom sections, the nozzle is the only thing it goes through. Sprayers, before we always had that dead space. You guys still have that dead space. We can update those with a express nozzle body end cap there, so the last thing it goes through is the nozzle body. And then there's a little pin there with a cap that you can actually flush it out the side if you wanted to. So that's some things that we can add for attachments onto your sprayer. It takes 100-foot boom. I think we were down to about 2-3 hours, depending on what. If you had all the tools there and you had a couple guys, you can do it in a couple hours on a 100-foot boom, roughly 7 sections. So it's a neat little attachment, great update. Also, we have other attachments too. You can update your poly boom plumbing to stainless if you want, or if you have a lot of stainless ones that are just junk and bad, you can just buy the same sections. You can buy the whole pre-assembled nozzle body and stainless steel boom tube all together as one piece, ordered as an aftermarket bundle. Talk to your parts guys and they'll be able to figure that out for you. And you can just go unhook them, the tubes, plug in your new tubes right there without having to. It doesn't matter. Yep. It's a great little added, aftermarket type deal there. One-stop solution. Instead of buying each tube, putting each nozzle body on, it's a full-out solution right away. Drop and replace. Okay? Questions, comments, abusive statements? Other than that, kind of went a little long there, Mark, but
No, that's fine. We can get back.
we'll, I think we're going to head up to the shop up there, and we're going to do kind of a quick little walk around deal with a 4830 or 4730. We'll do kind of a quick walk around or add any more questions, comments that you guys want. So,
Super. So here's the right.
body end cap there, so the last thing goes through is the nozzle body. And then there's a little pin there with a cap that you can actually flush it out the side if you wanted to. So that's some things that we can add for attachments onto your sprayer. It takes 100-foot boom. I think we were down to about 2-3 hours, depending on what. If you had all the tools there and you had a couple guys, you can do it in a couple hours on a 100-foot boom, roughly 7 sections. So it's a neat little attachment, great update. Also, we have other attachments too. You can update your poly boom plumbing to stainless if you want, or if you have a lot of stainless ones that are just junk and bad, you can just buy the same sections. You can buy the whole pre-assembled nozzle body and stainless steel boom tube all together as one piece, ordered as an aftermarket bundle. Talk to your parts guys and they'll be able to figure that out for you. And you can just go unhook them, the tubes, plug in your new tubes right there without having to. It doesn't matter. Yep. It's a great little added, aftermarket type deal there. One-stop solution. Instead of buying each tube, putting each nozzle body on, it's a full-out solution right away. Drop and replace. Okay? Questions, comments, abusive statements? Other than that, kind of went a little long there, Mark, but
No, that's fine. We can get back.
we'll, I think we're going to head up to the shop up there, and we're going to do kind of a quick little walk around deal with a 4830 or 4730. We'll do kind of a quick walk around or add any more questions, comments that you guys want. So.